Good evening, board members and administration and all those that are participating in our live stream work session on the reopening of Haywood County schools. For those that are joining through live stream, welcome. I hope we learn a lot this evening. And at this time, I'll ask Dr. Putnam to start the update that we've requested tonight. Dr. Putnam.
Thank you, Chairman Francis, members of the board. We have a lot of information to share with you tonight, hopefully so that we can reach a very informed and good decision on Wednesday night, I believe, when we're set for that. We have, I want to put out a disclaimer just real quick. The Mountaineer article that many folks have read, Jabin and I were asked specifically about Plan B, and rightfully so. That's the most difficult of the plans. And so the information presented there was centered around Plan B. That is, we are not indicating that as our recommendation. We are not indicating that as the only plan. We just responded accurately to the plan we were asked about, which was Plan B. So I just wanted to share that information with all of you, and so that anyone listening in would also be aware that that's what we were specifically asked about, which is Plan B. We have met with principals. We have completed a return to learn stakeholder survey. That survey concluded today at 12 p.m. noon. And Ms. Barker and I are going to share with you the results of that survey. Once we are through the portion sharing information about the survey, then we will move on to a detailed explanation of Plan B, in which Ms. Barker will share the instructional component and I will share the safety component. We will then move to Plan C, and Ms. Barker will share the instructional component and I will share the safety components. So that's kind of the format for presenting all this information to you. Also, I've asked Dr. Mark Jaben, the medical director for Haywood County, to join us. He had a conflict with a commissioners meeting, so he's going to try to join us. So we will try to put him on at some point in time to address any questions you may have, and also share his disposition in regards to school reopening. So I'll start with the survey results in regards to concerns that folks shared with us as far as reopening. And in discussing those, in reading those results, and Ms. Jackson is displaying that for you now, we had a common theme amongst all stakeholders, and it was the same 5 at the top of every category. And the very first concern listed about a reopen, actually attending in person in a Plan B scenario, was public health regulations not being followed. That was number 1 amongst students, parents, teachers, certified support staff, classified employees, and administrators. Another common item amongst all stakeholder groups as far as a concern is confidence in procedures to disinfect school facilities. When we get into a detailed discussion explaining the plans, you will see that it's a pretty complex task to try to overcome. The third is availability of disinfecting materials such as hand sanitizer. And again, I'll discuss that in more detail when we get to Plan B. The fourth concern found amongst all stakeholder groups is the use of personal protective equipment. That concern both being required to use it and others using it appropriately. Some of our, all of our stakeholders were worried about having to use personal protective equipment. And then the fifth concern was childcare amongst all stakeholder groups. So I wanted to point those out to you as the main concerns amongst our stakeholder groups, and let you know that that was how the five primary concerns. Obviously, there were other things that they were concerned about and other comments that were shared. In an effort to give you really concise feedback, I narrowed it to the common concerns found amongst all stakeholder groups. So I'm going to pause there and ask if there are any questions about the survey results in regards to concerns. Okay. If there are none, then I'm going to pass the ball to Ms. Barker, and she's going to talk to you about the next portion of the stakeholder survey.
Good evening, Chairman Francis. Good evening, Chairman Francis and members of the board. The second portion of there are a lot of instructional questions asked on the survey. Tonight, we're going to limit these results to the opening of school because that is the major issue on our plate at this moment. I did want to share with you how the question was asked to our stakeholder groups, and then we can go through these results. So the question was formed: how do you feel about physically returning to school in the fall if all safety regulations are met? And these are the choices. You could answer very excited, I can't wait, I'm somewhat excited, I'm neutral, I will return, but I prefer remote, or I do not want to return to in-person instruction. So you can see within the students, if you look at the very excited, can't wait, and somewhat excited, and kind of condense those, that looks like 51, little over 51% of our students. If you look at I will return, but I prefer remote, or I do not want to return, then that is like 32% of our students. Under parents, very excited, can't wait, 21.75%, somewhat excited, 15.51. You kind of look at the combination of those that seem like they want to return, and that's 37.26%. For parents, on the other end, and again, several more neutral, probably wanting to see, what direction things go in the next several weeks. But for parents, I will return, but I prefer remote, or I do not want to return to in-person instruction. That's 46.2. So that is different than how the students responded, a little different in the survey results there. Next, we go to our teachers. Very excited, can't wait, 20.86%. Somewhat excited, 23.68%. If you kind of look at condensing those, 44.54% of our teachers, 18.42% remain neutral. And then I will return, but I prefer remote was 20.30%, or I do not want to return was 16.73%. Those collapsed are 37, a little over 37% for our teachers. Moving on to our certified support staff, 16.67 were very excited, 14.91 somewhat excited. Those together are a little over 31%, 28% neutral. Then I will return, but I prefer remote, or I do not want to return. 21% and 17%, those together combined about 39% for certified. Our classified employees, very excited, somewhat excited, 17.74%, 16.67 combined, 34.41, 26.88 were neutral. That was the highest answer in that. And then I will return, but I prefer remote, or I do not want to return. I will return, but I prefer remote was 18.28%. I do not want to return 20.43. Add those together, 38.71%. So I want you to, Dr. Putnam, I want you to have these two important questions in front of you tonight. So if you need to ask us any questions, and you can see, obviously we didn't capture all of our stakeholders, but in an attempt to do that, these are the results that we got. Any questions for me or Dr. Putnam?
Ms. Barker, it looks like, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but it looks like, with the exception of kids wanting to come back to school, everything else is split down the middle to neutral. Is that a fair statement?
Jill, did you hear the question? Ms. Barker?
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to flip around and let her use my computer.
Okay.
Sorry. Just a little technical difficulty there. I did hear your question, Dr. Rogers. I think that's a very fair statement. I think what strikes Dr. Putnam and I in looking at this is our parents and our students. You know, the parents have a different perspective, as they should, from some of our students. So I think that was a very fair statement. Any other questions just about the survey?
Any other questions for Ms. Barker? Very good, Ms. Barker. Thank you for sharing that information with us.
Okay, at this time, if there are no other questions for Ms. Barker, what I'm going to do is ask Dr. Jaben, who's kind enough to join us. He had a conflict with the commissioners meeting. He's wanted in a lot of locations, but has agreed to come on and share his medical expertise and disposition with us. So thank you, Dr. Jaben, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Trevor. Yeah, the commissioners were quite questioning this evening, so they had so it went on a little bit longer than expected. But thanks for having me, everybody. I'm assuming you can all hear me okay, even if you can't see me. And yell at Trevor so he can tell me if that's not the case. The other day when we were talking with some of the school folks, there was a context that I said at the beginning of that conversation that I hope will be helpful for all of you in trying to make your decisions and choices. And the context is this, that there is no policy and no procedure that we can assemble or put together that's going to cut the risk to zero in the schools. And I'm hoping that that's not new for anybody. I'm hoping that everybody is in agreement with that and embraces that, because it certainly changes the focus of what you might want to think about. What I mean by that specifically is there is more of a chance of a child or a teacher or a staff member or administrator being in school positive, getting that at home or at work, at home, than it is for a kid to get it in school. And this is what we're seeing over and over. What we can do is to make it as we can reduce the risk as much as we can, but we cannot make it zero. And part of the challenge is, are people going to be comfortable enough with that to send their kids? And will teachers be comfortable with what can be put in place so that risk can be made low enough that they feel comfortable being back in the school, say for staff and administrators? So that's, I think, the challenge that's really before us. Now, you may ask, what's the acceptable risk? And I'm going to tell you that there is no hard and fast answer there. Each family is going to have to make their decision about the benefit of in-school education versus out of school versus the risk to health. And that's going to be a judgment that's going to be different for different people. And you're seeing it in the teachers, right? There's a large swath that are neutral. They're trying to make this decision. So I think we from public health, we from the school system, the more information we can put before folks, the better they'll be able to make that judgment for themselves. So I'm going to stop just a second, and I'm wondering if that's brought up any questions or concerns. If you don't quite agree with what I just said, please say so, because I think it's really important for all of us to be on that same page as we try to help ourselves and help families, come to this choice. So, Trevor, I'm going to stop for just a second, and people, please weigh in.
Dr. Jaber, I had a question about your first explanation about the risk ratio or the risk to the children. I didn't quite understand what you said there, and I apologize for that. Would you kind of restate? I know that you said there was no way to guarantee 0%. I understand that, but the comment right prior to that, I didn't quite gather what you were saying. I'm sorry.
Yeah, so there's going to be some risk. The question is how much we can reduce the risk as people try to make their own judgment about how much risk they're willing to accept to have their kids in school or to work in school. Is that clear?
Yeah,
for you, Chuck? Okay.
you answered it. Thank you.
Dr. Jabin, I have maybe a couple of questions. One
Sure.
is what does the transmission rate look like right now? Give us a snapshot. Are we on a steady incline, plateau, and where are we at right now in Haywood County?
I would say that this is the way that I just explained in the commissioners meeting, but if you look at the curve, right now the curve is really starting to accelerate upward. What I mean by that is what we're seeing everywhere is that you'll have a level of infection in the community, and then you'll get a little spike, a little bump. And if you can contain the bump and get back to baseline, then you have really, kept the risk down, so to speak. When those bumps start coming closer together and you don't have time to recover to baseline, that's when you see the curve start to accelerate. And when there's essentially no time between the bumps, you see the curve accelerate straight up. If you look at the curve for Haywood County 2 weeks ago versus now, it's been a drastic increase in cases, probably a 50 or 60% increase over the last 10 days. Now, let's put that in some context, because the overall case numbers are still low relative to everybody around us, certainly relative to the hot spots in South Carolina, Florida, Texas, Arizona, etc. So the absolute numbers are not great right now, but the trend is definitely way up. That's the current situation.
Thank you. Let me follow up with this. What about rate of hospitalizations and or usage of ventilators? And if you can go, Haywood County is we're affected by what's going on in Buncombe and Jackson because just proximity. If you could give us some idea of what those two areas look like as well, would be great.
Yeah, thank you. So I want to make a comment before I go there because it may help with some context. If you look at what's happened since reopening in May, across the country. It's been not what everyone hoped it would be. It's been much more increase in cases, and now in those hotspots, increasing in hospitalizations, and now as of last week, increases in death. North Carolina has lagged behind. Gratefully, we always lag behind, and we're lagging behind here. And so we're, a few weeks behind what we're seeing in our neighbors. But there's no doubt that we in Haywood County are going other places on vacation, sometimes to hot spots and bringing it back. Other people are coming here. So there's this great cross-pollination that's going on. So although we have been slower to reopen, and probably, in my opinion, I'll say wiser, that's why we're probably seeing lower levels in the state than we see in our surrounding neighbors. Now, having said that, we have been over the last, I'd say, week or two in Haywood County, somewhere between, I'm going to say 3 and 10 hospitalizations. There have been no deaths in Haywood County as of now, although I will tell you there was one death that was attributed in Buncombe County, even though it was a Haywood resident. You have to understand that these cases get reported by the county of residence. So even though that person was actually living here, they counted it in Buncombe County. In Buncombe County last week, they saw a very marked increase in their cases and their hospitalizations, and a near doubling of the number of COVID patients in their ICU, as well as people on ventilators. So that's the experience in Buncombe County. Again, the actual numbers are not great if you compare it to some of the other places we see on the news. But the trend certainly is there. We have been very fortunate in Western North Carolina. And I don't know if that's just because we're good people or we're lucky. I'm always fond of saying it's better to be lucky than good, but that's just me. But we have lagged behind in lots of those ways. And whether or not we can maintain that is, we'll have to see. But that's the current state, as I understand it, Mr. Rogers.
Thanks again. One more.
Sure.
I apologize. I've got you here for a second, and I want to make the best use of the time that we have you. What is when you see a spike up, if you look at the trends across the country, and you see a spike like we're in right now, what generally happens next? Does it continue, or what causes it not to continue?
Well, if you were to look, for instance, at the curve of New York, which spiked up very precipitously in April, that's what made the news. If you look at the curve now, they went way up and they've come way down. So that's a possibility. They suffered for that, but that's a possibility. You can see other places where the curve has gone up and never gone down, it just continues up. So as I like to say, there was this belief or hope early on that the warm weather would make the virus sort of settle down. And what we've seen is the warm weather has done the opposite, made the virus flourish. Not because the virus is any different, but because we're different. Meaning that when there was shelter in place and less contact, people were not about getting, infecting each other, that got control of things. As soon as we had people back around each other and moving around, that led to more contact, which leads to more spread, which leads to more infection. I kind of have used the analogy of a pot of water on a stove with the lid on top. If you turn up the heat, the water's going to boil. The pot's going to start jiggling. Eventually, that pot's going to blow off and it's going to overflow and make a mess. Clearly, when you increase the contact between people, you turn up the heat. And so in Haywood County, we've turned up the heat. The water's boiling. The lid's jiggling. It hadn't made a mess, blown off, or made a mess yet. That's for places like Florida, and Arizona, Texas. Their stovetops are a mess now. And so that's what happens. Going forward from here, we know what will work to calm things down. And those are the basic public health measures that, you've all heard a million times. But right now, what we know is not, although many, many people, and especially in Haywood County, many people are adhering to those, enough people are not that it's causing what we're seeing. And I think the other important concept is when you see spread like this, it's not blanket spread all over the whole community. It forms in clusters. So for instance, family member goes to a family gathering. They're 20 or 30 people. Nobody's wearing a mask. They're all together. They're family. Turns out a day later that one of the people there starts to get sick. So they were in their pre-symptomatic stage. They unknowingly infected all their other family members. And now 5 of those family members are positive. That's how it happens. And if you can isolate, if you can identify and isolate and quarantine those folks so that they don't spread it any further, then you can get in control of the bump. That's what we saw in April and most of May. But when people don't do that, when they continue to go out and about, even with symptoms, and they don't wear a mask, they don't practice distancing, they don't wash, they don't follow public health measures, then that's when you see these spikes. So the spike is caused by groups of individual spikes that coalesce to form what we see as the big spike.
Again, thanks. And again, one more question. Demographically speaking, are we seeing the same thing the nation's seeing, that it's, or are we seeing it spread across a greater demographic now?
Yeah. Well, and I think everybody in the nation is seeing that there is the hugest, by far, increase in cases is amongst the younger populations, under 50. The senior citizens in our country have been pretty fastidious about what they're doing and not doing. And so if you look at just the percentage of cases 2 months ago, maybe 25% of the cases were in the elderly and maybe 5% were in the under 25, 30 population. Now those have totally flipped. There are now twice as many percentage-wise infected people under 25 as over 65. The other thing that's a little disturbing to me, if you look deep into the data, death rates around the country have started to go up in these hot spots. 4 or 5 weeks after their case load started to increase, and that's the lag that everybody sees. Here in North Carolina, our death rate numbers have really been pretty flat. But amongst the group that has the biggest increase in cases, those under 50, the death rate has actually gone up 50% in the last couple of weeks or month. Now, again, the numbers are not great, but from a percentage basis, that's what's happening. What that means is that the people who are getting the biggest increase in cases are now starting to see an increase in death. Where this plays into the school, I think, is nobody really knows what happens to kids. There was some data out this week that said that kids above 10 or 12 act just like adults, like young adults in terms of contagiousness and spread. And kids under 10 or 12, much less so. And all sorts of reasons postulated for why that might be. If you look at the countries that have reopened schools, each of them has mixed and matched their actions and interventions a little bit differently. Not all of them do masks. All of them do distancing. Some do pods of kids to keep them together. It's a bit of a various mixing and matching of the smorgasbord of possibilities. But if you look at the countries that have reopened schools, some of whom just brought in the older kids first, some who just brought in the younger kids first, the common denominator is the school, where that was successful was where there was a low spread of virus, low prevalence of virus in the community. And where the degree of virus was higher, that's where it didn't work out so well. And I think that matches with, I think, what we can now safely say, which is that a child infected at school likely got infected at home by a family that at work got infected or out in the community got infected, maybe at a family gathering where people weren't actually doing everything they could do. And that's why I say that's where it's going to happen. And so, you've got parents that are trying to make this decision. If they think that the school should make it a zero risk and any kid who gets infected at school is the school system's fault, we've set ourselves up for disappointment and frustration. So I think a lot of whatever decisions you guys make, and you guys are on the firing line here, it needs to bring in the families to this idea, this concept that there is no zero risk. What we could do as a school system to reduce that, what you could do as a family to keep your kid in school and every other kid in school and teachers in school and administrators and staff in school is really, I think, actually from a public health standpoint, is an opportunity to maybe help people think about this maybe from a little different perspective than what they've been thinking about it before. So I'm sorry for that long-winded answer. I kind of got off into a tangent there, but I hope that that's a helpful perspective for y'all.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Jabin. That's I totally agree with that. Yeah, it's certain areas is totally different than others, and but we definitely appreciate what you're doing and appreciate your help on this situation to help us too.
I didn't ask you, but I may as well since
Please.
I have you. What about what's the actual number of active cases in Haywood County today?
Yeah, and that's a good point because we have sort of moved away from focusing on total cases to focusing on what's our load right now. If you go back to, let me see if I remember this right, June 22nd or 23rd, at that time we had 8 people actively infected in isolation and about 15 people who were close contacts in quarantine. Today, as of noon, I'm sure it's changed since then, but today, as of noon, it's more like 50 people in isolation and probably 80 or 90 people in quarantine. That's been in the last 3 weeks. So that gives you a sense of what the current active load is, if you will, in the county. And we're starting to follow those numbers because it gives us a snapshot of what we're dealing with right now.
And would that be across that same spread demographically? Are we seeing an increase in the number of younger people?
Up until
as
this
well?
week, I would say that 90% of that increase were people under 55, say, and most under probably 45. This week, we have now seen at least a half a dozen senior citizens who are now infected and positive with symptoms, some hospitalized, most not, fortunately. And I'm sure that you've heard, in nursing home, we've had a big outbreak in a nursing home here. So that's been the big change in the last week. The senior citizen population has really not been as affected, but that's obviously changed now.
Any other questions for Dr. Jabin?
Can I throw out one other concept that I think it's an important concept as you guys move forward thinking about this. Everybody's focus is on how can I keep my kid from getting sick? And I want to change for us that focus just a little bit because we're going to have kids get sick. The better question I think is how can we keep everybody around that kid protected enough so it doesn't shut down the whole class or the whole school? So this is the concept of what a close contact actually is. So if I could take a minute and just talk about that to let you know how we determine that and how you might want to use that concept. So a close contact is defined as contact within 6 feet for more than 15 minutes. So that is the CDC, that is the state definition. We actually have expanded that definition to include 6 feet for more than 15 minutes unprotected. Unprotected meaning wearing a mask, essentially. The reason that we have done that is because we feel like there's enough data out there to say that if I'm infected and I'm wearing a mask, then I'm not spewing virus all over the place. If I'm in a room with someone who's infected and they're not spewing it all over the place, I'm less likely to be an actual contact. And there may be some protection for me wearing a mask from the virus actually getting in. I'll tell you that I've been on the phone with the state and the CDC this week, and I've asked them, are they going to change that definition anytime soon? What I can tell you from the state and the CDC is they're discussing it, which means to me that they're thinking about it, which means to me that we may see this change in the near future. We in Haywood County have been using that definition already. The reason that I point that out is that if we choose to use that expanded definition, there are always going to be people who go to the CDC site and say, hey, that was not part of it, this, that, and the other. And so, but to me, and with our experience of what we've seen in terms of the cases that we've had, I think that's a really important feature. That makes a huge difference for what we do in the classroom and in the workplace. Because if in a classroom we can keep every other student and avoid them being a close contact, then they don't have to be quarantined. It's only the close contacts that have to be tested and quarantined. And if you look at our experience of what happens to somebody who is exposed but not a close contact, almost none of those have gotten sick. So that's what gives us confidence to say this expanded criteria may actually work. I'll probably sleep better at night when the CDC and the state actually adopt that. But I'll tell you that for my purposes, and as I think about the school system, this concept of not let's keep every kid from getting infected, let's keep every kid, staff member, teacher, and administrator from being a close contact. So when that illness happens, we're not shutting down the whole place. So I hope that that's a distinction that makes sense to you. I'm really happy to entertain questions if you don't think that should apply or whatever, but I thought that that was an important concept to share as you go forward.
Any further questions for Dr. Jabin? I appreciate all the information. It's given me a lot of insight on what we're facing. And I mean, out in the general public, you hear everything from it's a hoax to it's nothing to it's everybody's going to die. I mean, it's it's all over the map, unfortunately.
Well, listen, I really appreciate you guys having us involved. And, you know, anybody who has questions for me, please, please, please reach out and ask. I think the more that we can share and be on the same page, and I think this issue of bringing the families into this conversation and having this perspective will go a long way for you guys and for us to open up the schools if that's the thing to do, and more importantly, to keep the schools open. And I think if we it is all over the board, and I think it's all over the board because everybody has a different idea of what matters. School matters. It matters to everybody. And so I think there's an opportunity for all of us to be working together to head the whole community in a better direction. So thank you. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
I've got a question, if you don't mind. Can you
Sure.
expand a little bit on masks and types of mask and how, because there's rumors out there that certain masks work and certain ones don't and things like that. So could you expand a little bit on that for us, please?
I can. And what I want you to know is I now know the difference between a micron, a nanometer, and a pixelmeter. This weekend, I'm putting together a piece for the paper that delves into the actual science of masks. But here's the down and dirty. There is plenty of evidence now to say that if I am infected and I'm wearing a mask and I cough or sneeze or talk loud or sing or any of the things that throws virus way out into the world, that mask, almost regardless of the material, will block 90 or 95% of what is expelled. If I am in an environment where someone is expelling virus and I am wearing a mask, it depends on the material and the weave of the material and the number of layers. But a common cloth mask of multiple layers, high density cloth, will block somewhere between 40 and 70% of what I take in. And what I say to people is, does a mask work perfectly? Is it the sole answer? No, there's no data to support that. Does it help? Absolutely. And if you think about the real challenge here is not that I get exposed to virus. Exposure doesn't mean that I get infected. For me to get infected means that that virus has to get inside me. Either because I touch a surface that has the virus and then touch my nose, face, or eyes, which gives it an outlet in, or I breathe in enough virus. But even that doesn't make you sick, because if the load that you get inside you is small enough, your immune system will take care of it. We see all these asymptomatic people. That's what's happening. It's only when the immune system gets overwhelmed that you get sick with symptoms. And to take it one step further, the only people who are really getting seriously ill, either having really long-term complications that go on weeks and weeks and weeks, or people that that die, are not necessarily because of the virus. It's because their immune system goes into overdrive trying to fight off the virus. And so the immune system starts to kill not only virus, but it starts to kill other normal cells. That's where the people really get into trouble. The challenge is we don't know enough in the world of medicine to predict whose immune system is going to do that or not. We know that it's more likely in older people because their immune systems aren't as strong to begin with. But when you see 20-year-olds dying of COVID, that's what's happening. And there's no way for any of us to predict how our immune system is going to react until we get there. And hopefully that's why we don't want people to get there. So Jim, there's going to be an article out probably in the Wednesday paper. If you want to, you or anyone else wants to dive into nanometers, microns, and pixelmeters, it's all going to be in there to explain the science behind how a mask can be helpful. Not perfect, not the sole answer, but helpful combined with all the other measures that we talk about.
Thank you. What about like is there any more science to how long the particles linger on hard surfaces and touching things or anything like that?
Yeah. So I think what you've seen out back in April and May is still sort of the belief. I think that what has changed is that I think most everybody thinks that getting it from a surface is way, way, way less impactful than what we thought it was 2 months ago. That if we had to break it down to where the risk is, it's airborne, probably 95 or 98% of the time, maybe surfaces less. I can tell you that there's hardly a case that we have seen in Haywood County, and understand that the contact tracing nurses have like this 3-page form they go through with everybody, so it's very in depth. Most everybody is airborne contact in a high risk place, crowds, not masks, people not paying attention. That is the overwhelming majority of what we see, much less so on surfaces. So that I think in terms of the school system, do we want to be disinfecting frequently used surfaces? Sure. But I don't think we have to get crazy and be cleaning out the corner of the room every day, kind of a thing. What you know about the airborne things is it comes out in large droplets. Those large droplets fall on the ground probably in a few minutes. Sometimes those droplets will break into smaller droplets and they stay in the air maybe a few hours. And that's sort of where it is. The thought is in terms of airborne stuff.
Thank you.
Sure.
I think we've had some great questions tonight. Does anybody else have any questions?
I've got one more, Mr. Chairman, about confidentiality you're talking about of the people. That's something that I've just we're trying to determine. That would be that's had one question I've had asked to me. Said, how do we know we're going to keep confidential and who's? It's kind of a hard thing to do anyway. I mean, it's going to be tough. But how the health department really looks at that and how we need to be advising people to.
Yeah, we've already gotten questions to the health department about what the school system is doing about that. Here's what I think. Personally, I think if there's a positive case in the class, we can notify parents of that without breaking any sort of confidentiality. What we do at the health department is when we get a positive test result back, we match that obviously to the person, and we're on the phone with the person saying, how are you doing? What do you need? Who would you be considered to have been in close contact with? And then we contact those people. We don't divulge who those people are. We don't tell anybody who named them or didn't name them. We can talk to employers, and there have been some cases, especially when we've not really gotten much cooperation from the person who's sick, where we have reached out to employers and said, hey, you need to know that so-and-so is such and such, and do you really want them on the job? And it invited them in to be part of managing that situation. But as a rule, we don't share those names. So I can see that there is a room for you guys to let parents know when someone in the classroom has been infected without doing that. They'll do it on Facebook. I mean, we can't control that, right? If the name and stuff gets out, that's nothing we can do about. But I think we can safely do that and protect confidentiality short of Facebook and what people want to do. That'd be my view.
Any other questions? Great questions. I'm learning.
Listen, I've been a doctor for a few years, and I can't tell you how much I'm learning every day out of this. It just is such a moving target and changing, and it makes it really tough to make these decisions that you guys are having to face. I mean, I'm on the phone every day, many times, just among us in the health department, trying to figure out what to recommend to somebody. So the thought of recommending to an entire school system is daunting. And again, I am so happy, Patrick and I both, to be involved in whatever way we can. As you get more questions, as you delve into it, you're going to get more questions, and we're here for you.
Well, I sure do appreciate that. And looks like we need to make sure that our stakeholders have some options. That sounds like to me.
And I
Thank you
think,
very much.
yeah, if I could just throw out one thing, one
Sure.
other thing that I should have said before, but I didn't. Listen, I think whatever you decide to do is the correct thing to do. And I don't really think that that's so much the important decision as that we understand up front and we commit ourselves to following what happens and adjusting. And I think that commitment and that adjusting as we go is really the important focus, because nobody knows the answer to the question that you're grappling with. There probably is no answer. And you may figure out the way to make this work. And we may look up in 2 months and it's all gone to custard. But I think if we just start from the standpoint of we can't get it to zero, we're going to cut it as short as we can. Let's invite our partners and families into this. We're going to reassess at some point and we'll make our decisions based on what we know at that time. To me, if I was giving you any advice on how to think about it, that would be the framework that I would think of it in. So I appreciate you allowing me to add on there.
Well, I appreciate those comments because it gives us insight into how we can make a safe, informed decision, but keep in mind that the kids do need to be getting back to school at some point in time for sure.
Agreed.
Any other questions, comments? Thank you so much for joining us.
All right. Thank you. And be happy to be in touch.
Yes,
Thank
sir.
you, Dr. Jabin. I appreciate it.
Sure, Trevor.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Dr. Putnam, did you have anything else that you wanted to add after that?
I just wanted to publicly acknowledge Dr. Jabin and Patrick Johnson for their work with us. Also, Marty Stamey from Haywood Regional Medical. They went on a call with us to advise us and to hear our concerns, help us think through plans. And Jill and I are going to work our way through those plans, Plan B and Plan C now, if that's okay, and talk about those safety concerns. But before I do, any questions or comments following Dr. Jabin?
Dr. Putnam, I'll just make I'm just going to state the obvious. The difficulty that we're going to have is we're dealing with young people some of them between the ages of 4 to 18. And we heard Dr. Jaben say that social distancing is extremely important when it comes to spread. That's a difficult assignment, period. I'm not really going anywhere with that. I'm just making sure that we're aware that, we're talking in some cases 4 and 5 year olds.
That's a very good point. All right. Anything else for the group before I move on to safety protocols for Plan B?
Go ahead, Dr. Putnam.
All right. So having met with all of the medical personnel, Tammy Quinn, lead nursing director, our lead school nurse, Kelly Martin Hicks, Marty Stamey with the Haywood Regional, Dr. Jabin, medical director for Haywood County, and Patrick Johnson, the public health director. So I share all that so you know where this is coming from. We wanted any plans we had vetted and heard by medical personnel. And I wanted to give you the definition that they gave us for close contact criteria. And that is within 6 feet for greater than 15 minutes without a mask. So there are 3 conditions there: the within 6 feet for greater than 15 minutes without a mask. One of those you can safely assume that we are not going to meet. We are going, if under Plan B, we will be with students greater than 15 minutes. So that one's gone. The other 2, maintaining the 6 feet and requiring a mask. So those 2 conditions would have to be met throughout the day, throughout the building, at all times. Face coverings would be required for every teacher, staff, and student, K through 12. If you listen to the governor's order and press conference, every school will be required to create a hand washing schedule. The amount of time I've heard is about every 25 minutes. We've done some things to meet that. As you well know, our classroom, not all of our classrooms are equipped with sinks. So way back 2 months ago, we ordered some foam dispensers that dispense a disinfectant. Think of it kind of like Germ-X, but just as effective, a little more pleasant, a little better feeling on the hand, a little better smelling, 60% alcohol or greater. So one of those would be installed in every classroom to facilitate this hand washing routine. Daily symptom screenings prior to entering the school buildings. That means every kid in the building would have to have their temperature taken and a health history questionnaire completed. Regular cleaning schedules throughout the building. We have devised a plan. Josh Meese and his department have worked really hard on developing a custodial cleaning schedule, as well as what part teachers will take in that, what part administrators will take in that, what part bus drivers will take in that. And so we have cleaning schedules, as well as appropriate kill times when applying disinfectants, and apparatus, use of apparatus to apply those disinfectants. Non-essential visitors and activities involving outside organizations would be limited and would have to operate at 50% of ADM. So half our kids at a time is what they're telling us at a maximum. Food would be served or via pickup in the cafeteria, offering students at least 2 meal options, so they'd have an entree choice. Do you want chicken ring things or do you want pizza? Select one that morning, and our cafeteria staff would begin packaging those entrees into foam containers. The kids would come to the cafeteria using one-way traffic only, and then they would choose sides to go with that entree, but they wouldn't touch anything. They would just be telling the cafeteria folks what the 2 sides were that they wanted. It would be placed in their container. They would be handed the container, and out the cafeteria they go. Some may choose to utilize the cafeteria, but we obviously wouldn't want large congregations, and again, we would have to maintain the 6 feet of social distancing. Remote students will have to have the option to pick up their food. So if I'm a group A kid and I'm in session face-to-face on Plan B, I will be served a meal in that way. But if I'm a student in group B, then I will have the option to come and pick it up. Just like we've done the meal distribution sites throughout the summer and throughout the spring. Most of our buses have our 66 passenger bus using the seating arrangement that the governor will allow and lighting our way documents would support, we could have one student every seat all the way up against the window on each side. So literally one student per seat up each side of the bus, which means we can only hold 22 at a time. We pose principals with thinking about or considering how they will make that work with their buses. For lots of routes, that will mean running the route twice. That'll mean backing start times up so that arrival times at the school are pretty consistent around 8 o'clock. We advise principals to begin considering dismissal because, again, if we're running 2 routes to pick up, we're going to probably have to run the route twice to drop off. Our student ridership does increase in the afternoon because many of our parents are at work, and so it's possible to have 2 and 3 runs on some buses in the afternoon. So expect an extended dismissal time. Each school must have a designated COVID person, someone who is trained. They'll be trained by our school nurses to identify suggestive symptoms for COVID-19. So they will become quasi-experts, I guess you would say, in identifying the symptoms of COVID-19. Every school will be required to have a designated COVID room. So when a child shows suggestive symptoms of COVID, they would need to be isolated. The potential does exist if we'll know many of the symptoms associated with the common cold or flu or allergies sometimes present in the same way as COVID. So we would try to separate as many, but if we had an influx of kids that were all showing suggestive symptoms, that's a real challenge for us to find enough separate spaces to make sure there's no cross-contamination occurring in that scenario where we have what we think to be an identified sick child showing suggestive symptoms of COVID. We have begun plans for a daycare for our teachers' kids. They will need, if they're teaching in person every week, they're going to need some child care for their own kiddos on the week that maybe their kids aren't attending school. So we begin plans for that. Our thinking is that we would have a daycare on the east end of the county and a daycare on the west end of the county so that we could facilitate a daycare for our teachers' kids. And then I believe that is all. So we did proactively order enough foam dispensers for every bus and proactively order enough touch-free infrared thermometers to place on every bus. Although I don't think that's an option we're going to choose or recommend to exercise. We don't want to put our bus drivers in that situation, discerning between COVID-related symptoms and otherwise. It also could potentially create transportation and work hardship for our parents. So we'd want to do that at the school. We do have, the state has told us that they will provide 5 masks for every student that we have in our ADM. But we have yet to receive those. We hope to have those on hand. We have ordered, mask for every one of our employees. So we have also made floor signs. Many of you seen those at the boardroom the other night. If you come down the main hall, the floor signs that are directional and remind and reinforce the 6 feet of distancing. And a lot of our schools would be laid out in that way. So I say all that to say we have the materials on hand in regards to safety to launch Plan B. Jill and I will talk about concerns after we've presented both plans. So at this time, I'll turn it over to Jill and let her talk about the instructional component for Plan B. All right, before I do so, are there any questions for me in regards to safety, Plan B?
Dr. Putnam, I'm sorry, I'm just now got unmuted. I think you said you take these cases later, but with each site having a certified COVID-19 person in charge, could that possibly be health school nurses, or they may be looking at something else, and how would that be funded? Probably just another one of these non-funded deals.
You're correct, Mr. Rogers. We only have 6 nurses for all of Haywood County and 15.
Yeah.
So we are going to have to train additional personnel to be able to accomplish this task.
Okay. And the same thing with the daycare. That's East End and West End. That's a good thing, but it'd be kind of the same thing. The parents would have to pay for the daycare, or the teachers would have to pay for that.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
And it would not be a for-profit proposition. We certainly are not trying to make money off of our teachers.
Oh, yes. Yes, sir.
We are going to have to pay personnel that would staff those.
That's great. Okay. Thank you. That's all I had at this time.
Okay, thanks.
Well, Dr. Putnam, speaking of the daycares, that would be fairly limited as well, wouldn't it? Because you've got to maintain some sort of protocol in that, just like you do in the schools.
Yes, sir. All the safety precautions provided for the students in school would have to be made present in a child care setting.
Except now you're dealing with a whole gamut of ages gathered at one time.
Yes, sir. We would not drop below age 5. I know that for sure. We looked at the possibility of an age 4 student, pre-K. But what I can assuredly say, it would be ages 5 through 18.
Okay, well that helps clarify it, because so it's just school age that we're looking at.
Yes, sir.
One other quick question. This may come from Ms. Barker's side, but anyway, on the classrooms, I've heard talk about maybe the teachers may be just kids stay in that same classroom all day, and the teachers may move to the different classrooms. Is that maybe thoughts of the safety plan as far as keeping the kids all in one area during the school days, or instead of moving from building to building? And
that is certainly a consideration for middle school, where they have multiple teachers and they are on teams, and those same kids see the same 4 teachers throughout the day. But at some point in time, if we want them to have encore, they're going to need to move at that time. For high school, the composition and makeup of those classes, it's different kids for each class, and so there's no possibility for teachers to rotate 2 kids. It will have to be kids moving to class. And there, again, I don't want to jump into this too quickly, but there are some challenges and concerns there as well with that movement on those campuses, be it middle or high school, maintaining the 6 feet and making sure the appropriate face mask is worn. So there are some concerns. Again, I'll wait to dive into those at the end.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Yeah, I knew there's going to, it's a challenge. Thank you.
Dr. Putnam, this is Stephen. I have 3 questions, I believe. Let me think. The school buses now, let's go to the bus situation. The safety of the school bus, you saying 1 student to a seat all the way against the window, which is going to put the aisle and the seat aisle, nobody there, all the way back to the bus. Now, if you're stacking them seat by seat, is that not 6 feet between the seats? I mean, the seats are not setting 6 feet apart.
Right. You're correct. And I'm not trying to cast stones. I'm just going to give you the full history on that very discussion. In the original order released by the governor, the provision made for school buses was that it was alternating seats. It was 1 student all the way up against the window, every other seat. That order has since changed to include 1 student every seat. And so you make a valid point that at one time there was going to be 6 feet of distance with every other seat, but now it's changed to be every seat. So there is not 6 feet of distance. If we go back to the criteria for close contact, so we know that bus ride is going to be greater than 15 minutes. You can check that one off. That'll qualify us to be a close contact. We know that we're going to be inside of 6 feet, so you can check that one off as a close contact. The only remaining protective measure those kids on the bus will have is wearing that face mask. If that one's checked, they are in fact a close contact should they be near a person who is identified as positive for COVID.
All right, and going back to that now, you did say that they will be no checking temperatures before the students get on the bus. They don't be checked at the school, correct?
In the governor's order, great questions, by the way. In the governor's order, what he said, they would be checked prior to entering the school building, which indicated to us that that's where he wished for the temperatures to be checked. However, to be poised and ready, should we need to check them prior to boarding the bus, we preemptively ordered we have 77 routes. So we have 77 touchless infrared thermometers already in hand that we could place on each one of those buses. We also have preemptively 77 foam dispensers that we could place on the bus so that they could clean their hands as they boarded the bus and then do a temperature check prior to boarding the bus. So we have that capacity.
Okay. Just 2 more questions here. Now, you said that you had the dispensers that has the foam dispensers that you've put into the schools that you'll be trying to do for 20 or every 25 minutes or so on. I guess the question I've got to ask there is, we know that the CDC and it's better to wash your hands with soap. So if we're only giving them 25 minutes to go and put antibacterial stuff on their hands, when are we going to allow them to go ahead and wash their hands with water and soap during the day?
Yeah, another good question. So that would be at scheduled bathroom breaks or when a child chose to go to the restroom. And again, inside the restroom, there would have to be 6 feet social distancing and a mask. But that would be in most students' instances differences, just again, based on facilities. Many of our classrooms do not have a sink in it. So that is not a possibility that exists in the classroom. So it's going to have to be at a restroom break.
Okay, thank you. And one more question. Now we're talking about checking the temperature as they come into the school. What is the plan? For instance, I'll use Tuscola for instance. You've got every building that's got 3 entrances to it. Are we going to make all staff, employees, administration, and kids come through a certain point to get their temperature check, or we don't have multiple ways to come in and out? Just tell me how that plan's going to go.
Yeah. And many of these will be, well, all of these will be developed at the school. The principals know their school the best. We did talk to them about limited entrances. We did purchase, and these are in addition to all the other touch-free infrared thermometers that I named. In addition to all the ones I've already named, we also have touch-free infrared thermometers for the main entrances at the school. And for a school the size of Tuscola, we have enough touch-free thermometers for 4 main entrances because there's going to be a lot of volume there. And so what you would have is a 2-way entry. So you're looking at 2 people going in at a time into 4 main entrances, so 8 kids at a time. And we would have thermometers enough to do that, as well as touch-free foam dispensers at those main entrances so they could additionally wash their hands. For a good many of the students, and just talking with principals about their plans and as they call and ask questions, what many of them will do, you have to think about dispersing from the bus differently as well. You know, as it were, before COVID, the kids got the bus come to a stop, the driver opened the door and everybody piled off at once. That will not be the case. They will have to have a dismissal routine off that bus. Seat A1, go. Seat A2, or A2, go. Seat A3, go. And so there would be somebody at the bus door checking those kids as they got off the bus. The other main entrances would be for car riders. So that's how, and they would have to route those, because if they don't distribute them to separate entrances, they're going to end up checking kids twice.
Thank you.
Good questions.
Dr. Putnam, is there any plans to check the temperature of the kids more than one time during the day? Because a lot of times, kids will wake up having a little bit of a fever. Parents give them some Tylenol or something, get it to come down, and send them to school.
Well, that is, and Mr. Francis, you pose a great question, and that is something that we will be talking about in our concerns. But I'll just go ahead and address that here. Plan B requires that everyone do their part to keep everyone safe. It requires that everyone wear the mask. It requires that everyone be open and honest about symptoms, and quarantine when need to be quarantined. And that is a concern. I'm not saying anyone would willfully or intentionally do that, but they could inadvertently, have masked a temperature with ibuprofen. So that is a real and legitimate concern. So to answer your question, from that point on, it really is whether the kid presents suggestive symptoms in the classroom, whether the temperature will be checked or not.
Excellent answer. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
I have one question.
Okay.
You're saying with the buses with one kid, we're gonna haul 22 kids basically. How will that affect areas like Fines Creek, Chincopen? Can we get, how are we gonna run two buses when the kids are already on the bus for an hour or more? How's that gonna be feasible? I mean, you're gonna ask kids to get up 4 o'clock in the morning, or how are we gonna do, how's that looking? I guess is my question.
Another great question. And what I would say to you, Mr. Henson, is what we would have to do is divide that route with one of our buses that runs a shorter route. So maybe the route that runs nearest to the Bethel campus, we would have to run it earlier and drop those kids off earlier so that we could divert the remaining time between whatever time they drop their first run of kids off. So we could utilize that time for them to run part of those longer routes to shorten the Chincopen route. That is certainly not ideal, and it does create longer bus times. Did I answer that question?
Yeah, somewhat. I mean, we're going to be short drivers anyway, probably, and then add that much more. It may be tough, right?
Yes, sir. It'd be very tough, and that is a concern as well.
Thank you.
Dr. Putnam, that brings about a pretty relevant question of how many of our current, do we know how many of our current bus drivers, etc., are committed to doing this?
That's where, again, another great question. So our stakeholder survey had a section for bus drivers. It was titled Classified, which encompasses our secretary or our custodial and our bus drivers, to name a few. And so we have some idea of how many. What we can tell you is that we have a good percentage of those employees that do not intend to return. We won't have hard numbers until we send an intent survey. If depending on which option this board decides to exercise, we won't have a hard number until we send out an intent survey where we have individual employees responding to an intent form. I said intent survey. I should have more appropriately said intent form.
Dr. Putnam?
Yes, sir.
A question that has come up to me just recently is what about substitute teachers, say, going from one school from this day, tomorrow they're going to go to June Luscombe, the next day they might be going to Canton Middle, the next day they might, are we going to regulate that, or is that just going to be based on what symptoms might show up? Or
yes, sir, Chairman Francis, what that would amount to, so if substitute teacher A goes to Waynesville Middle on Monday, he or she would complete the wellness survey and the temperature check. When substitute teacher A goes the next day on Tuesday to Canton Middle, they would again complete the wellness survey and the temperature check. So it'd be a day-by-day screening.
okay, thanks for answering that.
Any other questions for me before I pass the baton to Ms. Barker and she can talk to you about instruction under Plan B? Great questions. All right, Ms. Barker, I'll pass the torch to you. I'll just tell you, you don't have audio. Okay, she just gave me she pointed at me and she's running real rapid down here to my office. So she'll be on in just a second.
I don't know what's wrong with it. So there is a problem with my computer. I've moved to every office, but hopefully you can hear me now. Chairman Francis, members of the board.
Here.
I'd like to talk to you about Plan B, as we did, which I'm sure you read in the paper, just the options under Plan B. As Dr. Putnam said, I think the big piece of Plan B is it is 50% of our ADM. So at any one time, under the governor's plans that he set out, Plan B is at the most half capacity of our students. Some districts have elected to go 2/3, and that is definitely an option too. There are different ways to go Plan B. You can go 2 days, have a day between. Next group comes another 2 days. The one that we have talked about in our office has been every other week, although with transportation issues and running buses, we've also talked about every 3rd week. But I want to talk to you about instruction and what that looks like, because many of you have students, or obviously you're very interested in that. I think it's important that if we offer Plan B, and that's the direction the board and we feel is best for our students, they will, on every other week, the first week they come in, or if we were to go every 3rd week, the first week they will have instruction with their teacher, okay, in their room. The following weeks, that teacher will have the other half or the other 1/3. So that teacher won't be able to provide the remote support, but instead those kids will be working on pieces that were front loaded when they were there. The longer you go out every 3rd weeks, that puts those kids 2 weeks away from their teacher, having to do more independent work. And a teacher is still teaching 1/3 of the students. Also under Plan B, we have to provide, per the state guidance, a totally remote option. And this is where Plan B gets extremely complicated. The total remote option, best case scenario, we would want our own teachers teaching the total remote option, but that's not feasible, because our teachers will be teaching the students that are in front of them too. So we have to offer both of those. Because a large majority of our students and parents have indicated, or at least half, that they do not probably intend on coming back, there's a high likelihood that we could pull some teachers together within the building. So for example, if it's a classroom, a grade level at one of our elementary schools, that we could have 2 of those teachers pull in and say, you're going to be the remote teachers. Having said that, if we return to school, then that option will look very different, okay, because we would have people take advantage of that. So one of the concerns under Plan, the great thing is, which, we tried to capture, is people have a choice if they send or if they want to stay at home. What gets really complicated, and what I think parents need to know, the teacher they have will not be as consistent as if we were all remote. So I just think that's a big thing to point out. We would try to do our best with that, but at the same time, that could depend on, the location. So I hope I captured that. Let me answer some clarifying questions just about Plan B and what that looks like as far as instruction goes. Any questions for me?
Yes, Miss Jill. So you said that the 1/3 or the half. That really, so what do you think would be better? doing half or the thirds?
So what's better is there's no COVID and our kids are back in the school. I know y'all know that. So we start with that. And I'll be honest with you, Mr. Kirkpatrick, this is what's keeping me up at night. Because what's better is going to be for our kids to probably have a consistent teacher. If we were within Plan C, and I think we got to kind of talk about them at the same time. If we were all remote, then we would be able to assign, that would be our remote option. And parents could still choose to be with us or not, but then they would have the remote option of having their teacher. If we go under Plan B, we have to provide both. And that we can work it out. We can work it out, but it'll be messy. And it'll be ever changing, because one thing Dr. Putton didn't want to talk about that I hope he'll talk to you about are suggested symptoms. So even if, a teacher gets a sore throat or a headache, and I'll let Dr. Putnam go into specifics of that, there could be some where they're not able to come to work under Plan B. I do think, too, one thing that I think is interesting to note, if under Plan B, a math teacher becomes ill or maybe has had a contact and just has to sit out for several days, then we can't assign those math students necessarily to another math class, because then we're over our numbers. But if we're remote and a teacher is at home and they're asymptomatic, then they could continue to teach. Or if they become ill, we could assign some more students, and that wouldn't be as much of a safety risk because they're remote. I hope I'm making sense and trying to explain that to you. Also within Plan B, we have a plan to tie siblings together, and we understand the importance of that. I want people listening to know we know that, and we'll work very hard at doing that because we know the importance of that. Did that answer your question, Mr. Kirkpatrick?
Yes, it did. I'll have another question later on.
Okay, you ask away. Anybody else?
Ms. Barker, I've got a question. This is David Burnett. Would it be a possibility that if 50% of the people or the 50% of the families chose remote learning and 50% chose to go back to school, what would an option look like for that?
Yeah, and I think that's where, Mr. Burnett, and let me talk to you about that just to clarify again. We can do that. If 50% choose to go back and 50 don't, that's under Plan B. We have to serve the ones that want to be remote, and the ones that don't. That's where we will have to probably use some type of an online platform support, depending on how many kids. If we get a huge amount of kids, then we can use some of our teachers to teach that remotely. It may not be their teacher of record. It could be a teacher that was unable to come to work because of a pre-existing health condition. And so those factors would all be figured in. I think to answer your question, consistently for them to have their own teacher, that's going to be Plan C. Plan B will be an ever-changing target just based on staff who have come in contacts or have to go home for several days, or I hope none of them get ill. But we would have to plan. That plan would be changing just based on, same thing with bus drivers, Dr. Putnam said. If bus drivers have been contact traced, then we'll have to find substitute bus drivers also. So those are I just want you to be aware of the issues of both. And I hope that helped, Mr. Burnett.
Yes, that I just didn't know if you could have a full, basically if you had a 50-50 split, could 50% of them go all the time and 50% on remote learning all the time? I'm just not sure if that'd be an option.
You'd still have to divide that 50% into half, wouldn't you? Or would that still make our capacity?
Yeah, and I think what happens there too is, Mr. Burnett, if all the 50% that choose to go every day, then and they're there all the time, then those students are getting something that we can't offer the other students. And then other people may want to say, well, gosh, you know, those kids are getting to go every day in front of their teacher. I really kind of want to do that. When under Plan B, it's really every other week. And then with some of them want to come back to us at that point because, well, gosh, I want to send my kid because they're here every day. We have discussed that too.
Jill, I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
My concern is, and because I have a child with special needs, are the special needs kids going to come back into school, or are y'all going to try to do something with them remote? Because a lot of these kids have problems that could cause them to get something or catch something that most kids that don't have any disabilities or any other aspects going on wouldn't probably get. So what are you going to do for the kids with special needs?
Brady Stevenson has been in contact with just the latest legal reps about special needs. What I can tell you for sure, Ms. Baird, is their IEPs, they will be served by what their IEP says. We have some that, trying to think of the right word, some early guidance that they would be able to serve more due to their IEPs, depending on what their individual education plan said. But was one question that whatever, regardless of their IEP, then we would make accommodations in 504 and serve them. But that's an excellent question and a piece that we will have to look at for individual kids.
Yeah. Okay. Well, as a mother with a child like that, it's not in school anymore. You know, that's a concern I have because a lot of these kids have things that make it easier for them to contact things than other children might contact it.
Yes, ma'am. I understand that. Thank you for asking that question, Ms. Barrett.
You're welcome.
Ms. Barker, question about remote learning. I know last spring when we were doing the remote learning, the accountability was not as such. What's going to happen on accountability for remote learning if someone chooses to do that route?
Yeah, and thank you. I think everything this year is different because we're not in an emergency anymore. This is not an emergency situation. We do have a Plan C for all remote learning. And when that happens, you know, we don't have exception for grades this time and graduation and those pieces. All students will be held accountable. So if we were to go an all virtual route in Haywood County schools, you know, students would have to be present. They would have to complete the assignments. And we have got a lot of pieces in place that we did not have when this hit within 2 days. You know, a lot of it has to do with platforms, making sure that we're not overwhelming our parents and kids with different platforms. I know Ms. Jackson and her team are already working on tons of videos and things we are going to share out with our staff if we need to. Just this is the way you submit assignment. This is the way you submit grades. This is when grades are due by. These are when lesson plans have to be posted. So students who do not have internet access can do that. We know within Plan C, you know, that jump drives would have to be purchased for our kids that lack remote, lack accessibility. So they would have to download videos and things like that. We would have to get teachers to download and then deliver those jump drives or let them come pick up the jump drives this year. So there are pieces like that. I think also Dr. Putnam and Kim Jackson have worked on our 50 remote spots where students would be able to access throughout the community. So there would be several other pieces in place, but what you're asking, Mr. Francis, is regardless, the accountability, you know, even under a Plan B, it's a rotational. The students are going to be accountable for the work. There are no passes this year for graduation or pass-fail options.
Thank you for that answer, Ms. Barker.
Barker, I have one question too that I know we've this has kind of been thought of in the past, and I think it's kind of impossible to do it. But like you said, if there was 50% people in that classroom that day and 50% of the capacity of that classroom, then you had the other 50% of those kids who were normally in that classroom doing remote. There's no way we could be doing a live stream for that teacher to be teaching those kids that's sitting there, plus those kids that's sitting there on their computers. And it would not be fair to each one of them either. But I'm just wondering, have we ever? I don't think we're capable of doing that at this point in time. But I don't know.
Yeah, we've talked about that. We do have some other pieces we might be able to do, but we cannot live stream. Mr. Rogers, Ms. Jackson and her staff have assured us that we do not have the capability to do that at this point. And again, I think we need to remember under Plan B, parents and students have two options. They either go a remote route or they go a blended route. And if they go the remote route, we have to make that work because our teachers are teaching in the classroom every 2 weeks or every 3 weeks. We can't ask our teachers to do all that. We can't ask our teachers to do both. So that's the critical point there.
Well, that's correct. And that's why I was thinking it'd be nice if that teacher's teaching that subject, those kids in that classroom, have it recorded or something. And then those who are not there say, all right, here's your recording of what we did. Here's how it is. Because like I say, we can't overload the teachers. They've already got enough on them right now. And we want for their safety as well. So, and their well-being, that would just be, like you say, we can't do that. Can't make them do all that stuff.
But I do think we've learned lessons, obviously from last year. And one thing that we know we can do for our kids, because 20% of our kids like reliable internet. So we know that we can download those videos. The teachers can record videos though that they're using, and then the kids will have those videos regardless on a jump drive. If they come to a parking lot or a hotspot and try to download, they can download assignments, but they can't download teacher videos too. So that's just something to keep in mind. So we have got, a good plan for kids without connectivity. But again, none of these are perfect, and y'all are seeing that. These are tough decisions for our stakeholders and for us. What other questions about instruction?
Well, this is all so convoluted, and we could sit here and come up with 10,000 questions. For example, what if you're a high school science teacher? You show up to school that day, and even a seasonal allergy is going to make you look like you're presenting symptoms. Now, all of a sudden, you've got a science teacher vacancy in the moment. What if you've got 6 different teachers? And that could be very possible at a school the size of Tuscola, Pisgah, Waynesville Middle, Canton Middle, some of the bigger elementary schools. What if you end up with 6 teachers present that day? And you have to say, sorry, you can't teach today because you've got a runny nose. How's a principal going to manage through that? Where do those kids go that day? And then what about the next day?
I think that's the question. I mean, that's a, excellent point you make. And that's why, in a strictly online, we could probably handle that. In a face-to-face, Dr. Rogers, we're not sure how many substitutes also that we're going to have. And again, they're not certified. A lot of our substitutes are not certified in that area. And then, also in part combining teachers in elementary, they have the same certification, but I know they're listening to me out there. And some of them, if all they've ever taught was 5th grade, they probably would be uncomfortable teaching 1st grade. And I see that. So it's not as easy as just assigning a teacher. And in high school, they're very specific. Most of them have a certification and a specialty. So I want Dr. Putnam to speak about suggestive symptoms. Dr. Jabin did not mention it, but he did mention it in our big meeting that Dr. Putnam organized. And also our director of nursing, Kelly Martin, mentioned it today. And one concern they have is in the first 2 weeks of school, we always see a peak in kids that have sinus infections, strep throat, things of that nature. She goes, a lot of those symptoms are very similar to suggestive COVID symptoms. And one of their concerns was, you know, if we are going to have to report them, we are going to have to send them home and await testing. Dr. Putnam's going to get into specifics of that, but we are going to overwhelm our pediatrician offices and things like that too. So that was one concern he didn't mention that I think struck home with me as a parent too, is how are you going to know? And I'm going to let Dr. Putnam take it from there, and I'll come back to you, okay?
Okay.
Okay. Well, here I am again. So what I can tell you is most pediatricians will tell you in the first two weeks of school, there is a natural spike in the cases, and that would occur in a normal year. And in a pandemic, it's going to spike even more. And he told us to anticipate, Dr. Jabin told us to anticipate the greatest number of flu cases that we had ever seen or experienced. So you've got the normal stuff that's naturally occurring, sinuses, flu, cold, in conjunction with potential COVID cases. So discerning between the two is going to be quite difficult. So that is a concern for us as well. While we're on concerns, I'll just, you know, we've kind of naturally moved to the concerns portion. In option B, if you consider, Ms. Barrett, you brought up our exceptional children population.
Yeah.
As I indicated earlier, close contact is within 6 feet for longer than 15 minutes, unprotected. That's considered a close contact. And I really worry about our exceptional children population and their ability to wear a mask. And I even question whether that's healthy. So that is a real concern. So if you go through that checklist in regards to a close contact, you can check off that, yes, they've been around or in close contact for greater than 15 minutes. And I think you can also say for a good many of them that they were unprotected because they will not be able to wear the masks. And so there's 2 of the 3 gone. The best we can hope for is maintaining the 6 feet of distance. And some of those children require close contact in support of their efforts in the classroom. So you can probably check that one off. So that's a real concern for me for our exceptional children. The other concern is for our not just exceptional children, but children who are asthmatic or who may have some other type of respiratory illness that cannot wear a mask. And so you have that population as well that if you're looking at the close contact checklist, the 15 minutes, you can check that off because it's going to be greater than 15 minutes. And unprotected, you can check that one off because they're not going to be able to wear a mask. And so they'll have to choose the virtual. And so the only other hope that you have of maintaining their health and not contracting or becoming a close contact is the 6 feet of distance. And so I really worry about our ability to maintain 6 feet for all kids at all times. The 15 minutes, as I said, is a foregone conclusion. And then for some of our population, I worry about the ability to have them wear a mask. So Plan B poses a myriad of problems in its implementation. Jill may want to expand a little further on this. If we look at the instructional piece, going back to something you said, Mr. Burnett, about a breakdown. What if it worked out that 50% wanted to go virtual and 50% wanted to actually do the in-class or in-person instruction? Even if the numbers worked out, the likeliness that the certifications would match up are very unlikely. Because as Jill pointed out, that many of our teachers, especially in the secondary schools, have a very specific specialized degree. So that's problematic. If you think about a student who was asymptomatic, who attends our school all day and gets tested and is positive, there's the potential there to create a situation where multiple teachers and staff members become close contact. Even if they don't test as a positive, they are still considered a close contact and will have to quarantine. Other concerns I have are too often, and I understand it, and again, I'm not trying to be demeaning or harsh toward anyone, but we all, at the end of the day, have to provide for our families. And if in-person instruction is the only option provided for some of our teachers, they are going to be forced to utilize leave. And it's their personal leave or their sick leave that they're going to have to exhaust as prevention. And Jason Hines, I want to give him credit for this. He pointed out we are not only contending with staff and students who have tested positive, we are contending with staff and students who are just known as a close contact who will have to stay at home. So there's a lot of instability in that, and I think Ms. Barker was alluding to that. That instability amongst our teaching staff and that instability amongst our students' ability to attend school gives us great concern. Is there any questions you might have for me?
Well, what about the kids that are signed up on College Promise or even those that follow a vocational track? How does the 50-50 thing work for them, or Plan B work for them?
And I'm going to turn it back over to Ms. Barker for that question.
Hey, Dr. Rogers, and board, that CTE question has come up, and with our CTE teachers out there, being a former CTE teacher, as y'all know, that is so much hands-on. So several of the companies that we have looked at do provide CTE programs. Again, it is not, you're not in a classroom doing things with your hands, but they do provide some support programs. The college, Dr. Rogers, and I don't want to say this 100% sure. I know Jeff has been in contact with them, but I think their plan is to, they will be remote. So our kids that are in CCP classes could access those. in that way. But as far as CTE, those that if the option is not online, then the teachers will have to just support as best they can, and hopefully give them some more resources they didn't have last year. But the hands-on piece, just you can't ever replicate that.
Thank you.
Other questions for me?
I have one more while you're there again, Miss Jill, about the Plan B option. I had a question brought to me, something like Royal Hill Children's Home. They would like for all of their kids to be going to school at the same time due to the way they transport their children and they're in their cottages, etc. But they would like, I said, well, I don't know how that would work either. That's kind of a thing too, because they may have some elementary, middle, high school, and that's the thing that we might need to think about if we do go back to Plan B. That how are we going to make sure that those particular areas, it's kind of tough. Well, okay, all your elementary kids go this day, and all your middle school, to keep all their kids going at the same time and out of a cottage. They would just express some concerns about how are they going to be able to get their children back and forth and as well in like a place like Broy Hill, or we have other home units that have a big group like that. So anyway, that was just a question that they brought forward. I said, well, that's something that needs to be considered as well.
It is. And with the Roy Hill, students, we would have to make every consideration to try to keep them together, just based on those house parents. And several of y'all have asked me about that. So I look at that as like siblings within our district, and you can imagine we can do that though. I mean, we can get that together, and it may be, take a little bit of time, but we'll have to do that for our parents. And
that's the same question I've had from parents as well. I've got 2 kids, or I've got 4 kids, and I can't have them going different days because my husband and I both work. So, I totally understand. It's tough, but thanks for considering those.
anything else for me?
Yes, this question will probably be for you and Dr. Putnam both. Now, we know that scientifically the elementary school age kids, especially kindergarten through 3rd or 2nd, the movement of the mouth away, the teachers or anybody, that's how they get a lot of their learning skills. And I know that it's saying that we've got to wear a mask. I guess just touch on that. How exactly is that going to work? Because that's where a lot of those kids, that's where they start learning the speech, how your mouth is a movement. So just touch on that. How we doing work around that?
Thanks, Stephen. I agree with that.
Dr. Putnam is here to talk to you about the mask order.
That again has been, we've had some conflicting guidance on that. Initially, it was no child under age 11 should be required to wear a mask. Their lungs are not fully developed. That has since been overridden by the governor's order. There was no provision for children under the age of 11. It was simply, his statement was that every staff and student will wear a mask. So there was no allowance for that possibility. So Mr. Kirkpatrick, you make a great point, and I know I really didn't answer your question. All I can tell you is what initial guidance was and what the current guidance is. Initially, it was no child under age 11, and now it is all staff and students will wear a mask.
Well, see, that's where you're going to have another problem with special needs kids, because a lot of those kids don't understand, and they're not going to want to do that. They're not going to want to wear a mask because it's not going to be something that they're used to or familiar with. And you have to realize that they have certain quirks that other kids don't have. And if you try to put a mask on a kid with special needs, may not, be able to understand why you're doing that, and it may scare them.
Yes, ma'am. I agree with you, Miss Barrett. I'm not in opposition to that. You're exactly right. Other questions or comments?
Yes, I have one more, and I'm going to try and make this as intelligent as I can. Have they been any kind of push, whether it's been the county commissioners, whether it's been the governor, have they been any kind of push? Because to me, it sounds like the governor has pushed us in a corner to go remote learning for everybody. Have they been a push by anybody to talk to the communication companies to give us the capability of doing online learning for a whole year? It is not possible, and I know that we're sitting here saying we're going to record this, we don't record that, do a flash drive, do this, do that. There are obviously some people that don't even have a computer to put a flash drive in. So, have they been any kind of talk with the county commissioners or governors to see exactly the infrastructure of reliable internet in the county anywhere? Can you answer that question? Or I don't know whether that topic's been brought up. I'm assuming it has. Thank you.
Good points and questions. And what I would say to that is we are looking at community access points. If you'll remember, Building and Grounds brought forth a motion to give or donate surplus access points to the county. And that donation was made to them to assist the county in those efforts. And so I know that Kim Jackson and the ITC staff is actively working with the county to assist in creating those access points. And so what that would look like is it would put a place where kids could go to near to them, ride their bike, walk, maybe mom and dad will take them down and let them access the internet from those community access points. So we're looking at that. But having said that, I want to back up to something Dr. Nolte emphasized to us very early on in the budgeting process. And he said, we went through and prioritized, 5 items that were our priorities, and we had a number 1. And so we hammered that out without any regard to cost. And our number 1 was very expensive. And when we revisited it the next day, many of us quickly moved away from it because it was so expensive. And he very wisely said, your number 1 is your number 1. Don't change it because of the cost associated with it. So my encouragement would be, to rest on whatever the best option is, whether it be plan B or plan C, and then figure out how to make it work.
Talking about internet right there. Sorry, Dr. Rogers, jumped in on you. But I've just had a text message from a citizen here that's trying to stream with us right now, and he's we're just in the North Canton area, having trouble getting internet service. And it's like you say, that is a system that I believe we've mentioned this before. Our government's been saying that we know the providers like Verizon, et cetera, Hughes, and that, all the providers need to do a better job. And it's not been happening, but that's something that, yeah, we continue to work with rural areas. That was one of our topics at the conferences this summer for the Leadership Conference, School Board Association. Yeah, rural areas really need some help, and we've been promised help, but like I said, the money's still not flowing, and we still have a lot of issues to iron out with people not being able to get internet services.
Yeah, so I guess what I would say, Mr. Kirkpatrick, you bring a valid concern for Plan C, the virtual option, all virtual option. And my promise to you is that we will work as hard as we can to eliminate any issues that exist with whatever agencies or municipalities that we need to. I can't provide any assurance that it will be perfect. I can only promise, 100% of effort to try and make that as best it can be.
Well, not only with Plan C, but Plan B being blended, you got the same problem.
Yes, sir. You certainly do, because the virtual is available in Plan B. Other questions, comments?
Dr. Putnam, is this about to wrap up what you had prepared for us this evening, or?
Yes, sir. That was our goal, is to present the two plans, share with you any concerns we have you hear from a medical expert in our county, let you ask us questions and provide any information that we could. That was the goal. As far as agenda goes, we only have two other items, and it really is the consideration of further use of our campuses and extensions of our campus, and that being facility use and fundraising.
All right. You want to move on to those items?
Can I ask a couple of questions right quick?
Sure.
One, would the face shields be appropriate for kids to use rather than a mask, or does that have to be?
That's a great question, and we are currently exploring that with Dean Shatley. So we're trying to get legal advisement and through the health department. We're getting conflicting information. Again, listening to the governor's press conference and reading the order, what it says is a cloth face covering, which would eliminate a mask. But then our child nutrition department got guidance for the ones working the cash register that they could in fact wear a mask, but it had to be a specific type of mask that wrapped or curved below the chin to keep any respiratory droplets from entering respiratory airways or eyes. So we are actively trying to answer that question now.
Okay. Another one, I had to ask about the CTE program. If we were to go to, say, the Plan C, could it be an option to where teachers could bring some students in and do the hands-on instruction during certain days, certain students, certain days, and get some hands-on training done that way?
Again, a good idea, good question. I think the difficulty we have there is if we're saying one is better than the other or one is safer than the other, it's hard then to open your campus for a select few. And that sounds a little bit bias considering our campuses are being utilized by high school athletes. I think the difference there is the governor made provision for that specific group.
Well, that kind of helps with my third question or response was, is there any way like the kids that don't have access that we could, I mean, you hate to select certain kids, but certain kids that don't have access to the internet or something to that effect, that we could get them in school, or the other ones that have good access could do the remote learning.
Right. I think probably the best thing to say in regards to those ideas, and they are great ideas and very creative, is that, you know, once we pick the best overall plan, or once all of you vote on an option, the best I can promise is to work through all of those ideas and come up with as creative solutions that are as fair and equitable and safe as they possibly can be. But again, great ideas.
I know my wife just came in and said that Henderson County Plan C. Said it was on the news a minute ago.
Henderson County did go virtual. Yes, sir. That's correct.
I have a question, Dr. Putnam. I think it's more of a statement than a question. But this, our track moving forward is going to remain very fluid depending upon data from the virus and spread and all of those things that you measure. Also, in regard to changes in the governor's executive order. So now this is not a suggestion. I'm going to run the whole gamut here. So if we were to say start on Plan C, all remote learning, and 6 weeks down the road, something changes, that we would either move to Plan B or to Plan A. We're going to remain fluid as we go through this process, correct?
Yes, sir, Dr. Rogers. And you bring up a valid point that I feel is a real advantage. As you consider Plan B is in person, you're kind of locked in to that setup. You can't then back out to virtual. It's a whole lot more problematic at that point. Whereas if you start with Plan C and decide that you then want to go to in-person, you would then pretty readily be able to move to an in-person format. So virtual lends itself to in-person, but in-person does not lend itself moving back to virtual.
At that point, we'd be right back in the situation we were last year. I mean, almost creating an emergency situation again, wouldn't we?
Yes, sir. You certainly would, which is instability. And that's, you know, in any of the information we wanted to present to you, we want to promote stability if at all possible.
Well, and I think that's I don't want to ramble on and hold anybody any longer than necessary, but and I think that's the key, is trying to create as stable a format and process given the circumstances moving forward, because, you know, stability's everything in the process of learning.
Absolutely, I would agree.
Dr. Putnam, the one thing I know that we've already discussed earlier, not tonight, but on other discussions about sports, I know that's a whole different deal. And for the viewing audience, maybe we need to say, something about the sports piece of this thing, regardless of which plan we choose.
Yes. How's that for an answer?
Sounds good. Well, I know that the North Carolina High School Sports Association has, already announced kind of a plan that they're following. So, with kids, it would be, if we went virtual or non-virtual, all kids would still be eligible to play. I remember that was a question that had come up earlier.
Yes. As I remember the discussion and kind of where we landed with that, if they're enrolled with us, they're a full-time enrolled student with Haywood County Schools, and they are eligible for participation in athletics, provided that they have a physical on or before, on or after, March 31st. Don't hold me to that date. I'm just trying to recall without it in front of me. March 31st, 2019. And they meet the eligibility requirements per our policy for academics. And they're not currently serving any suspensions that would have been in place. So provided that they meet all the eligibility requirements and they have a current physical, under those conditions, they would be eligible for sports participation.
Thank you. Good answer.
Chairman Francis, that brought to another point. There is other organizations and other groups and committees and associations within our state that I know they are asking for their freedom as well in certain areas, and you get it from their association. Some associations like FFA, for instance, they've talked about how they may be able to do something. Their organization says down to a local level, but then the governor tells us something different. I would really like to see us work on DPI and their state and their governor to understand that there's a lot of other kids that have events and activities that also going to be going on. I know they don't always have a funding with athletics, but or the money that's not there in their organizations. And I know it opens up another can of worms and a whole different ball game. But we need to hope that those kids are taken care of and their success as well in their trade areas or whatever organization that they're in. That they also have state competitions and other competitions coming up very soon, and they're not able to work with their groups as well. So that's something else we need to work on and look at. So thank you.
And I didn't realize this. I don't multitask as well as I would like to, although I can do it some. Brandy Stevenson had texted me, going back to your question, Mr. Kirkpatrick, where being able to see the mouths of children as they're forming words as part of the reading instruction. She has looked into, they actually make clear masks. So we would be able to see their mouth and the forming of words. So we're looking for every possible solution, whether it be Plan B or Plan C.
I think that one thing's come clear tonight is this is complicated, and that my prayer is that we get through COVID as soon as possible so we can get back to somewhat of a normal life. That would be my prayer.
Mine too.
Amen. The next items on the agenda, Dr. Putnam, let's carry on with that. Unless there's other questions.
Well, I just wanted to bring up the topic of facility use, what we have stated to principals, and I just wanted to make sure all of you still felt comfortable, is facility use. What we've told principals is that the governor has ordered the facilities closed, and there have only been a few exceptions. One was high school athletics. Two was for a modified graduation, and the third one being a Jump Start program coming up in a week or so. And those three exceptions are the only ones I'm aware of in regards to any use of the facility. Additionally, in his latest order, the governor said that all outside visitors, that should be limited. So he is discouraging any additional folks on our campuses and our facilities. So I just wanted to provided that we're in phase 2, given the current governor's orders, we were okay to continue our practice of limiting facility use and only providing it for those provisions that the governor decrees.
Yes, sir. Thank you for that update on that and reaffirming what we had already pretty well discussed.
Okay. We do have a lot of community folks that want to use our facilities, and we try to always be very kind and supportive, let them know we do want to help, but there are some rules that we have to abide by at current.
Thank you.
The second item, if everyone...
Hey, Dr. Putnam, let me ask you one more question before you move off that.
Okay.
You mentioned something that reminded me of a question that I had. Given Plan B, I'm assuming Jump Start would continue as planned. Under complete remote learning, how would that affect the Jump Start program?
Yeah, I'm going to let Ms. Barker field that question. More her area than mine.
Thank you for asking about the Jump Start. So, Dr. Rogers, currently the way that plan looks is bringing kids in one-on-one for assessment, and then after those one-on-one assessment meetings, then we could offer some small group tutoring. So with that being said, Dr. Putnam and I talked today, and our principals have known that depending, that plan had to be submitted about the middle of June, I think. So we've known throughout this that if things change, we would need to regroup. I think we still, under governor's orders, could do that. But I think if we chose to go Plan C, we could also do Jump Start remotely. And that's something that we had talked about, and Ms. Shipman knows too. And we've advised our principals that if something changes, for instance, the rates are increasing, things like that, we would have to move to remote. The big piece of that being we are required to have it, but a lot of districts are going virtual with that piece also. Any other questions about Jump Start?
No, ma'am. Thank you. I had a hard time finding the mute button.
Any other questions for me since I'm back on now? I did want to say something to Mr. Henson's question back. If we were to start under a Plan C model, one thing and again, we're talking the advantages and disadvantages because it's both sides. As you can see, what Mr. Francis said, it's complicated. But under a Plan C, if there was a limited time, I think that Dr. Rogers talked about, that also gives one advantage to that is that also gets our building. I mean, it gets gives us time to plan for those students. So, if we were to move to a Plan B as far as transportation and who's really accessing online and who really needs remote, that would be, and again, we're advantages and disadvantages, that would be an advantage. We would know more about where our kids are at that point if we had started virtual. And we can do that under Plan B, just may take a little longer. But I just wanted to say that with your question, Mr. Henson, earlier.
Ms. Barker, this is Mr. Francis. Got a question. If we did go virtual, is the governor's rule about we can't do any virtual learning until the 24th still in existence, or does that mean we can, is there any flexibility with the calendar or anything? Have they said anything to that nature?
I have not seen that. Are you talking about the first 5 days can't be remote instruction?
Correct.
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing across the state that that these districts, the biggest districts in the state have opted for C online. So we would have to get some clarification. What we would plan on right now is beginning with remote from the beginning. But I think that's a great we would have to see, because I know there was some movement to change that those first 5 days, but I have not seen any clarification on that. So it's a good question.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Barker. Was there anything else that we need to discuss?
Dr. Putnam says fundraising. So
Okay. As you can tell, I'm using my device, not for the agenda, looking it up. So I'm trying to remember what we got going. So anyway, thank you.
I think we're doing pretty good.
We're doing good.
So the last one is fundraising. Due to what we have instructed principals to this point and all parties, all staff, is that due to the economic impact of COVID, we felt it in our community's best interest not to authorize fundraising at this time. Again, just want to revisit that and make sure that's something this board felt good about.
Anybody have any questions for Dr. Putnam on that issue?
Yeah. When you speak of fundraising, be a little more specific. Are we talking about Tuscola's Big T Club in anticipation for sports? They have certain things, and I think that school on the other end of the county does the same thing.
Yes, sir. That's exactly what I'm speaking of. And, to this point, delayed or denied any and all fundraising. I wanted to know and make sure that was the correct path to continue down, because there's two sides to the coin. I realize our students will and our schools will need the funds from that. The flip side of that is the consideration for many of our community members who may be jobless or reduced hours, reduced pay, and might create an undue hardship for members of our community. So that's the two sides of the coin. I'm just seeking a little guidance here on that.
Well, I think all I can give you is what I think, given the upcoming answers that we're looking for. I mean, who knows? I mean, there's no way to predict anything at this point. But let's say they don't cancel fall sports, and the Big T Club hasn't done their drawdowns, etc. Sure, they could probably postpone it a little bit, but how are they going to? Are we going to put them at a total disadvantage? Are we going to put our athletics and other clubs and other entities that depend on the fundraising? Are we going to put them at a total disadvantage? That's my concern. I don't want to put them in that place, because, let's consider these. I think you and I've even had this discussion before. These seniors only get one senior year, and if we pull that away, it may in some way limit some of the things they can do. So I'm not sure that I'm supportive in continuing down that track. That's just me. I'm just one vote.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Rogers. Any others?
I just gonna say it's gonna take more than a little money for the big T club. So
Oh, yeah, Pisgah's going to have to really work hard because Tuscola will beat them.
All right, settle down.
He started it.
I know it. Dr. Putnam, I think the thing that we could do is we could keep abreast of what's going on now and just again, Dr. Rogers, I hear what you're saying, but they're not going to have some of the expenses perhaps that they would have had otherwise. According to whether they cancel the season or play sports. I know like the band competitions, I'm pretty well understand that they're not going to happen. So there's not going to be that travel expense and some of the other things that clubs would normally do. They won't have the expenses, but I think that we need to keep an open ear to be able to react to anything that may happen.
Well, and I think that's what I'm getting at, Francis, is if we're not real careful, we'll get caught. You know, we're going to want to make this upcoming school year as great as possible. And so if some of the band competitions are canceled, we may have to do some things that are creative within ourselves to fulfill some of these people that work very hard at whatever sport or activity they do, to give them some opportunities to perform. So it may take some of that money.
Yeah, you may be right. Very well.
And this is what I've always found out about fundraising. Either people can give or they can't. And those that can will, those that can't won't. And you know, you just move ahead the best you can.
Well, it'd be very difficult even to have like a drawdown type deal. I mean, just because of the limitation to 10 people or 25. So anyway.
Yeah, I'm not saying they don't have to get creative, but you know, to just eliminate all fundraising may be difficult, or may create a hardship we don't want later on.
All right.
It is certainly something all of you can think about over the next few days. We could revisit it at any time you choose. The only disclaimer I would put is that if we authorize even one fundraising activity, we need to authorize all of them, or maybe create some qualifying criteria that it has to be a school-wide fundraiser that benefits all students. And I'm just spitballing ideas here, but maybe some qualifying criteria. Maybe it's that we delay till phase 3. Maybe it's that we delay till we actually go to in-person school. I'm just throwing some ideas out for you.
Okay.
Well, I definitely think when you brought this subject on, you've created some additional things for us to be thinking about.
Yeah.
Well, I was afraid y'all were getting bored, so I wanted to, you know. Yeah.
We greatly appreciate your consideration.
Yes. All right. Is the agenda being completed now?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. Unless anyone.
Okay. Well, I appreciate everybody's participation. Those that tuned in remotely, thank you very much. And board members will meet again in person down at the EC this Wednesday for consideration of some of the topics we talked about. That's all I have.
Mr. Chairman and members of the board, Ms. Barker and I just wanted to say thank you. She's over here throwing stuff at me. Tell me say thank you on her behalf.
All right. Thank you, guys.